Hey everyone, and welcome to this session. I'm very excited today to be here with my colleagues Dillon, Hanson, head of PD, and Zygis, Marazas, head of product, to announce a new product that we've been working hard in the last months. But before we dive into the product, I would love to maybe set a bit the stage, give a bit of context on where we come from, so we can better understand why we built the product and what are we trying to target here. So I think it would be fun to recap a bit, but around like 6 years ago when DIA launched on mainnet, the whole DeFi space looked very different, right? It was Uniswap times, yield farming, and then things rapidly moved into a whole multi-chain ecosystem, and then came liquid staking, afterwards real-world assets, yield-bearing stablecoins. Like the space has rapidly evolved, but now we are at this point where actually BlackRock is tokenizing treasuries on-chain, pension funds have crypto strategies, corporations are running stablecoins for payments, and even Fidelity is hiring DeFi product managers to build on-chain vaults. So obviously the space has moved and matured and evolved into a more institutional and professional ground. The off-chain capital is moving on-chain. And this has brought a new cast of players, from asset issuers to risk curators, vault platform, institutional allocators, the teams that were not here 2 years ago. So the market has changed, has evolved, and we realized that the data and the Oracle layer also needed to evolve to satisfy the needs of this new paradigm. So with this sort of landscape in place, I would love to maybe pass the ball a bit to Dillon and talk us through a bit about this market evolution. Have you seen it from the BD side? Who are these new players that showed up and what they need? What are the new requirements?
As you mentioned, the evolution that we can look at over the last, let's say, 6 years since DeFi summer, when kind of, DeFi really launched and oracles became integral to use cases. We saw that these use cases were still to an extent limited to on-chain kind of data, simply asset price feeds, right, for DeFi. But if you zoom out, really, the original use case for oracles was to actually bridge the gap between our traditional world and what's happening on chain. And so what's super exciting now is like this is actually coming to fruition, fully kind of fulfilling this prophecy and this vision of what oracles always were intended to do. And so now as this industry is evolving, as you mentioned, use cases are really expanding. It's not just these native teams that are, Web3 native, but it's teams that are institutional focused. It's teams that are tokenizing real world assets, teams that are more familiar with like yield bearing real world assets, that they want to bring that yield on chain. It's the demographic of people interested has really expanded, and the positioning of oracles has expanded. These new entrants into the industry, we get retest what's working and what's not working. When we're having conversations with institutions and teams that are not our historical Web3 builders, really what these teams are looking for and interested in is verifiability, the pipelines of actual transparency, where they can audit end to end the infrastructure that they're using. These teams are not coming into Web3 and being familiar with the traditional trust assumptions of Web3, saying, oh, like I'll assume a black box of and a lack of data provenance just because of a brand. But these teams are really challenging how transparent and how verifiable different infrastructure solutions are. This evolution has actually been super exciting for us. It puts us very well positioned within this category of interest. And the last thing I'll say on this topic, just to relate back to kind of new use cases, new entrants, a lot of the collateral, a lot of the information that exists that's being delivered on chain is off-chain collateral. It's off-chain information. And so this transparency is really important. And how I've kind of envisioned DIA in our evolution is becoming this sort of this on-chain collateral attestation layer now. You don't just have simply on-chain asset price feeds, but now we're working with so many teams that have off-chain collateral, where we're, essentially querying reserve account information from institutions, different custodians. And not to get too far ahead of myself here, but really exciting to see how the transparency within infrastructure is not just a nice to have, it's actually integral in the decision that a lot of these teams are making. So that's a bit of the high level as to the new incumbents, the new entrants, and also kind of what they're looking at, what they're prioritizing.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And you already tapped a bit into this off-chain collateral coming on-chain, and obviously as a result, we have all these new types of assets, right? Maybe Zygis, you can talk a bit about these new types of assets that we are seeing and we are working with, And maybe also what are the challenges that these new assets are bringing if you compare it a bit more to this, like you said, Dillon, this historical builder native and those assets that they were working with.
Happy to do that. So, hey everyone, pleasure to be here. When you started speaking, I just thought about we went from yield farming vegetable coins to actually using on-chain rails to earn yield from the treasuries, which is probably the most stable asset in the entire market. And all of that was actually built on the technology that was started back then when the DeFi summer kicked it off. So it just shows how far we've come since then. And this is where we are evolving together. So basically the idea is that before, as Dillon briefly mentioned already, people were interested mostly in token price feeds, getting data from multiple sources, from numerous sources, to be honest. We are supporting more than 50 of them, and then aggregating the data from all these different venues and determining what's the actual price. So there were quite a lot of statistics going on in determining what's the market price, adding guardrails, making it immutable from market manipulation. And it's just a completely different set of parameters that you need to take a look at. While what's changing now with institutions, it's a complete different case where you need a lot of customization to integrate each new asset on a very I can say personal basis, right? Because each asset is actually different. Most of them are different. So as the methodologies that are used to issue assets are so different, each of them requires a very custom solution. And how can we actually price this asset? And it's not about the liquidity that we bring with them. It's more, we are beginning to talk about what's the fundamental value of these assets? What are they really valid in the real world environment, rather than based on the market price that we are seeing traded on DEXs or centralized venues, right? So it's a completely different market, which requires completely different approach. And this is what we are focusing on. We want to support the net asset valuation of the tokens. We want to make sure that tokenized treasuries actually have treasuries behind them, right? And that yield-bearing tokens actually have the collateral backing them, plus the yield that they earn. So this is the goal. This is why we're launching it now at its starting point at the moment, and we'll transition faster and faster from here on. And we think that we are very well suited to actually support these use cases in a verifiable and actually trustless way. So this is where we stand at the moment.
Yeah, very exciting. I think you already started teasing a bit the product. So we're launching DIA Value, which is this fundamental valuation methodology oracle. And maybe Dillon, you can walk us through a bit about, because it's not just one methodology, it's a suite of methodologies, it's a bundle of methodologies. Maybe you can walk us through a bit of the different methodologies that this new Oracle product includes, and also the use cases that it's built for or designed for.
Absolutely. This product was built and designed purely out of market need. So that's something that's super exciting. Probably about 12 months ago, when the prevalence of stablecoins really started to grow, we hit this kind of inflection point where RWAs actually started to make sense and start to be delivered on chain. We were having a bunch of conversations with teams where, let's say, they had liquidity on a DEX, right? The traditional way of pricing an asset is based on the market-based price feed. These teams would be tokenizing assets and have, let's say, a couple $100,000 of liquidity within one pool on Uniswap. Zooming out, this is really not a robust way to price an asset. This is, without robust liquidity, it's really subject to market manipulation. And this has always been the most common exploit in terms of oracles, is actually manipulating low liquidity pools, for example. However, these assets, these tokenized assets, they were nonetheless collateralized by millions, if not tens of millions of dollars in on-chain or off-chain collateral. A pretty good example that I think makes a lot of sense. We're working with a team that's tokenizing a fiat currency. They're tokenizing the euro. The liquidity for this asset on chain thus far is about $300,000 in a pool. The asset's collateralized by tens of millions of dollars in off-chain reserves. It's held across different custodians and bank accounts. And so what fundamental valuation is essentially valuing an asset based on the underlying collateral rather than strictly market-based price feeds. And so for the stablecoin example, let's say that, as mentioned, it's tokenized in the euro. Well, what we can do is compare the amount of outstanding minted shares on chain against the underlying collateral that's being held off chain or on chain. And if it's 100% collateralized, so let's say the amount of outstanding minted tokenized euro is 100% backed by actual euro, then the value of that asset is effectively 1-to-1. It's effectively that of €1. But if it's 90% collateralized, then it's 90 cents on the dollar, for example. And so what this valuation suite does is it allows us to price assets that either have no on-chain liquidity or very limited on-chain liquidity. And liquidity fragmentation has always been the issue. As we look towards tokenizing everything within scope of interest of being tokenized, it's going to be an absolute blocker to require that all of these assets have such robust on-chain liquidity. This is the evolution of the industry. And so that was one example, and I'll bounce with Zygis here, but this methodology suite has been built to essentially value assets based on their underlying fundamentals. It's not only off-chain collateral or net asset valuation, it's also yield-bearing stablecoins. You can look at contract exchange rate methodologies. So again, how much of the outstanding shares is actually backed by the deposit tokens. And so this has been really exciting. This has been built, as I mentioned, by demand of our partners, of lending markets, of risk curators. We've had already integrations for these types of oracles across Morpho, Euler, Silo, and other top lending markets. So honestly, I hopefully I'm giving off the excitement here, but it really has been an exciting evolution to the typical traditional Web3 use case of oracles. This is really bridging now the gap between off-chain and on-chain information.
Yeah, maybe I just want to add a couple of points. I liked what Dillon touched about the liquidity pools. Just imagine how much capital is sitting idle in these liquidity pools. Of course, some of it is earning yield, but some of them are not traded so frequently, so it's just sitting there, and you can't really utilize those funds. And just imagine how helpful would that be to redistribute to a more efficient market. To a more efficient market placements, like a lending pool or somewhere else. Right? So it just really gives us more opportunities if you rely on the fundamental value rather than the actual market price. And I also wanted to maybe emphasize how important is that all of this process of evaluating the token has to be done on a very verifiable rails, as if you're going to trust millions and even billions of dollars in evaluating this capital, you have to have a very secure and battle-proof systems actually backing it, right? So this is where I think DA is very well suited for it. As you know, we launched Lumina around a year ago, right? And it was specifically built to serve such custom use cases by utilizing the market participants, where I guess the main point is that our network and our operational know-how is actually allowing to evaluate all these tokens in a trustless and verifiable way by using endless amount of nodes to actually get the data. You're using the LaserNet for verifying the data, and then you're delivering it to any chain of your choice. And this is where, with our experience, we've been operating setups as that since many years before, as an active participant in the entire crypto and DeFi ecosystem. This is why DA is one of the best suited players in the market to actually support the needs of the institutional capital at the moment, and to actually make it work in the entire open DeFi ecosystem. So just wanted to add this point when actually trying to deploy these new assets or create new vaults or create new lending markets. We help with everything that I just mentioned, and I think the future of DeFi looks super bright here.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think that's a perfect way to end the session here. Obviously, we're very excited about this new product launch. This is day one. We're going to have multiple partnerships coming in the next days. We also did a rebrand of the new DIA logo on the website, like a new strategic step in DIA as the next evolution of where we see the market and where do we see DIA fit in this new ecosystem. So stay tuned for the updates that are coming the next days.
Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you.